if you didn't already know this, right, we live in Southern California. Okay? Wildfires are a thing here. Okay? And wildfires don't start big. Right? We can go on Google. In fact, I asked ChatGPT to give me the 5 biggest wildfires and how they started, and lighter, electrical malfunction, little tiny spark. One spark, perhaps one careless moment, one small flame. At first, it looks harmless. It's easy to ignore. You might even think, that's nothing. It's not that bad. They'll be able to contain it. But in dry grass, one spark can spread faster than anyone expects. Before long, acres are burning. We see it every year. If only it only takes seconds, and everything changes in that moment. And that's what Solomon is saying here in Ecclesiastes chapter 10 tonight. A little folly doesn't stay little. It spreads and it grows. Over time, it begins to outweigh wisdom. See, it doesn't take much of it. It doesn't take much of foolishness, that's what folly means, foolishness to reshape your life. Folly doesn't arrive loudly. It grows slowly, quietly, subtly, and it begins to outweigh wisdom. And Ecclesiastes chapter 10 matters. It matters for us to sit here and read through it, just like any other chapter in the book of the Bible. This matters. It matters because it helps us to see early and calls us to back to a life of wisdom. It helps us see folly take its root and starts creeping in earlier, right? And it calls us back to wisdom, to live wisely. This chapter, Solomon comes back to the notion of folly. He's already talked about this in the first 9 chapters. If it wasn't extensive, it was a little bit in each chapter that he's already mentioned and talked about folly. He warns and he speaks out against it. And he does so through the lens of 4 different foolish people. Right? Foolish people, or foolish roles, we could say. Right? He's talking about rulers, he talks about workers, he talks about talkers, and he speaks about officers. How foolish each one of those roles or each one of those people can be. Right? And the basic principle here is that folly will always create problems for those who commit it. Right? If we allow a little bit of folly into our lives, right, there's already trouble ahead. But let's go ahead and read these 20 verses that Solomon writes, or he wrote in chapter 10. And he says this, starting in verse 1. Ecclesiastes chapter 10, verse 1. If you have your physical Bibles with you, please open them up, follow along. It says this: dead flies make the perfumer's ointment give off a stench. I love that immediately, right out the gate. He's not messing around. Dead flies make the perfumer's ointment give off a stench. Just the smallest, we're talking like a gnat. The smallest fly that lands in this perfumer's ointment, it doesn't smell good anymore. He says, so a little folly outweighs wisdom and honor. A wise man's heart inclines him to the right, but a fool's heart to the left. Even when the fool walks on the road, he lacks sense. And he says to everyone that he is a fool. If the anger of the ruler rises against you, do not leave your place. So before I keep reading, right, this first 3 verses is foolishness isn't loud at first. It's small, it's subtle, it's gradual, but it quickly spreads. And what does Solomon say here? It outweighs wisdom. It moves us in the wrong direction. It speaks to those inclinations that are of our hearts, the desires, sinful desires, right? And that's what he's saying here. It says a wise man's heart inclines him to the right, but a fool's heart to the left. He keeps going, verse 5, there's an evil that I have seen under the sun, as it were, in error proceeding from the ruler. Okay, here's the first foolish of the 4. Ruler, workers, talkers, and officers. Folly is set in many high places, and the rich sit in a low place. I have seen slaves on horses and princes walking on the ground like slaves. And that's the foolish part there that Solomon is pointing out to. Right? I have seen slaves on horses and princes walking on the ground like slaves. Verses 4 through 7 are helping us see, right, the way that we react. We react when folly takes its place in our lives. When we act foolishly, when we think foolishly, when we speak foolishly. Right? Solomon shows us in this chapter where folly subtly shows up in our life, in our reactions. So the way that you are reacting, verse 4, you see that ruler is acting out or reacting angrily, pridefully, we could say. If the anger of the ruler rises against you, do not leave your place, for calmness will lay great offenses to rest, right? We all have somebody in authority over us, and the way that we react to confrontation, to challenge, to correction goes a long way. Are we going to react pridefully? Are we going to react bitterly? Right? We so foolishly that we become incompetent. That's what's happening here in verses 5 through 7. Right? He's showing here how foolishness shows up in our reaction and how we act or react pridefully and bitterly. But he continues here, verse 8. He who digs up a pit will fall into it, and a serpent will bite him who breaks through a wall. This is him talking about workers now. He who quarries stones is hurt by them, and he who splits logs is endangered by them. If the iron is blunt and one does not sharpen the edge, he must use more strength, but wisdom helps one to succeed. If the serpent bites before it is charmed, there is no advantage to the charmer. The words of a wise man's mouth win him favor, but the lips of a fool consume him. The beginning of the words of his mouth is foolishness, and the end of his talk is evil madness. A fool multiplies words, though no man knows what is to be, and who can tell him what will be after him? The toil of a fool wearies him, for he does not know the way to the city. Right? This is that whole section, verses 8 through 15, is talking about folly in our patterns, in our lifestyle, right? In our work. Right? We could be foolish in our work. We'd be unwise in our work. We just look at verses 8 through 11, and he's talking about people who are doing simple work. He who digs a pit will fall into it. Why? Because he's not being wise in how he's digging that pit, so he's going to fall in. A serpent will bite one who breaks through a wall. Somebody's taken down their hedge, right? Wall retainer gets bitten by a serpent. Why? Because he didn't think to say, I'm going to look and see what's in here. I'm not going to be wise about this. I'm going to be foolish about this. He goes into speech. The words of a wise man's mouth win him favor, but the lips of a fool consume him. He continues here, chapter 10, verse 16. Woe to you, O land, when your king is a child and your princes feast in the morning. Happy are you, O land, when your king is the son of the nobility, and your princes feast at the proper time for strength and not for drunkenness. Through sloth the roof sinks in, and through indolence the house leaks. Bread is made for laughter, and wine gladdens life, and money answers everything. Even in your thoughts do not curse the king, nor in your bedroom curse the rich. For a bird of the air will carry your voice, or some winged creature tell the matter. There is your patterns, your reactions, your patterns, and your lifestyle. And I know there's a lot to unpack in this chapter, because there's the way that he writes, right? You're trying to figure out what does this mean, but he's showing us how foolishness or foolish thinking leads to a reshaping of how we make decisions, how we react, and how ultimately we live, what direction we're going in. See, folly doesn't send you a well-worded email on the 3rd of every Sunday, the 3rd of every month. Right? It subtly shows up in your thoughts, in your actions, your words, and especially your reactions. And the preacher calls us to watch out for that. He's saying, watch out how you react. Watch yourself. Examine, consider the way that you are reacting. Right? You want to be like the wise, not the foolish. And that leads me to our first point tonight. It's watch your reactions. Plain and simple. Watch your reactions. Folly doesn't arrive like a wildfire you can see coming. It starts like a spark. It's a little spark in dry grass. It's small, subtle, barely noticeable. Right? With a wildfire, sticking on that here, often starts with something small, right, and careless. One spark, one moment, one reaction. And that's where Solomon first takes us. He takes us to our reactions. He's pointing to the way that we react. Pressure comes, correction comes, Authority confronts, and these reveal the heart and intentions, our real hearts and intentions. And in one moment, a spark, let's say pride, anger, bitterness, and that's where the fire begins. Why is someone foolish? Well, he says, inclination of the heart. And what does Proverbs 4:23 tell us? It says, keep your heart with all vigilance, for from it flow the springs of life. We have to guard our hearts. We have to protect our minds. We have to hold every thought captive by the word of Christ, right? Because at any given moment, we can be challenged, confronted, corrected. How are we going to react? And the way that you react, if you already know that in your mind, how you will react, how you would react to someone lovingly correcting you, right? And that's, I'm going to storm off, I'm going to walk off, I'm going to disregard what you're saying. There's the intentions of your heart. Solomon paints the fool. People try to correct him, but what is he? He refuses to listen. He has no wisdom. Folly spreads quickly in our lives. I had mentioned this earlier. In verses 5 through 7, we see how folly makes a person incompetent. Foolishness turns potential into ineffectiveness. It takes someone who could do the job, and it makes them unable to do it well. Why? Well, we're going to talk about that here in just a second. Right? Because how you react matters. You can't allow that foolishness to cause you to react pridefully. I believe that's what he's saying in verse 4 of this chapter. Right? He's speaking about anger. Right? If a ruler, let's just say, for example, we'll put this in our terms here. If your boss is angry at you, right? How are you going to react to that? And if you react pridefully, right? There's the intentions of your heart is being revealed there. React pridefully. Don't allow your foolishness to cause you to react pridefully. Here, specifically with those rulers in charge of you. Let's just list that out here. I know you guys probably already know this. Bosses, right? Those who are in charge of you at work. Let's just throw in church leadership. Let's talk about systems that we don't have control over. Right? We can't overreact when either the systems that we don't have control over, or those are our employers, or even church leadership, right, are either trying to correct us, are confronting us, are challenging us. The goal there is to not overreact, but we do. Right? Pride cannot tolerate being confronted. It's about remaining steady when corrected, though. It's what Solomon's saying. Remain steady when you're corrected, when you're confronted, when you're receiving feedback. Proverbs 16:32, right, goes along with this, where he's talking about if the anger of the ruler rises against you, do not leave your place. Don't storm off. Don't leave, right? Attack it with calmness, for calmness will lay great offenses to rest. Proverbs 16:32. Whoever is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he who rules a spirit than he who takes a city. Reacting pridefully will make you storm off. If you're sitting down and you have a brother or sister in Christ who's sitting down next to you, lovingly rebuking you, exhorting you, trying to correct what it is that you're thinking or what you just said, and your next reaction to that is, I'm leaving, there's the intention of your heart, right? You'd rather act pridefully than humbly in that moment. If your reaction or your idea of this is going to be the solution, I'm going to shut down, I'm not going to talk anymore. There's the intentions of your heart. Get defensive. There are the intentions of your heart. Make decisions in emotional moments, right? I've heard many people say, "You guys do that, I'm leaving the church." Oh, that's what you're going to say to me? Okay, I'm going to leave, right? That's easier, I guess, than to sit there and try to listen to what the person's saying. But we do that often. We react pridefully. We react angrily, right? If you bring something to the table and somebody gives you loving correction and rebuke, and your next step, your reaction to that is, I'm going to leave because that person's against me. I think you've got the idea of church body and church community wrong. This exposes the heart's resistance to humility. So pressure's put on and we react, but this is where wisdom enters, right? Wisdom is going to push us to say, I need to have self-control, because that's what verse 4 is saying, right? Somebody's angry. Somebody who's in authority over you is angry towards you, right? And gives you the correction, right? Your next step is to say, I need to live and act wisely. And what does that look like? Self-control. Self-control. Pride is fragile, right? To be prideful is to storm off, is to shut down, is to get defensive. That's fragility there. But wise, to live wisely, to be filled with wisdom, and to say, I'm going to have self-control because this person might be angry with me for good reason. The correction and the confrontation and the challenging might be for a good reason. That's why maybe I need to hear this. Proverbs 25:28, a man without self-control is like a city broken into and left without walls. The fool reacts, but the wise shows restraint. This is what he's saying here in verse 4. If somebody over you is angry towards you, is showing something, where the practical application I've put on this is if somebody in authority over you is giving you correction or rebuking you or exhorting you, right? It's not to turn around and act angrily towards them or react angrily or pridefully. It's to have self-control and give yourself a minute to see what is it, why are they telling me this? Right? It's not to act foolishly, but it's to act wisely and show restraint. In verses 5 through 7, right, he gives us reacting angrily and pridefully, but also reacting bitterly. We always react bitterly to what we think is unfair. But that isn't anything new under the sun. I mean, if you have kids, your kids do that already, right? My 3 daughters, if one of them gets a candy, the other 2 react bitterly, right? But I guess the sweeter, just last night, here's a funny story. Last night, we were eating a piece of chocolate cake. So I took a bite, I shared some with Lauren, and then we shared some with Hallie, our 5-year-old, right? And we're like, you don't need to go make this a big deal with your sisters, right? The little chocolate cake we had was really sweet already, but what was even sweeter is I'm gonna go tell them. So she walked past them, even though she knew we told her, don't do that. She goes, that was so good. That was so good. Right? Her sisters didn't catch on, right? But they have in the past. And they react bitterly when things are unfair. But we also react as adults bitterly when things are unfair. But this isn't anything new under the sun, is what Solomon's saying. The world, we already know, brothers and sisters, that the world's misaligned. Fools get promoted and the wise get overlooked. Right? Maybe that's been you. I'm wise, I got overlooked. That fool over there got promoted. What's up with that? Right? And we're bitter. In these verses, folly's elevated, wisdom is overlooked. So basically, the wrong people are in power and the right people have been overlooked. Reacting bitterly renders you and I ineffective. It renders us ineffective. Why? Because your concern isn't getting what you. It's not what you have. It's not getting what you want. So what's another word for that? Right? I think we could even say that folly causes us to be incompetent. I know that sounds a little rough, but foolishness. In our foolishness, we are rendered incompetent. Foolishness produces incompetence. Why? Because it sabotages your ability to think rightly, to act rightly, to live wisely. It prevents learning. It clouds judgment. It creates avoidable problems. You confront the situation, the issue, for what it is. Right? It's being honest with yourselves. I'm envious. I'm entitled to this. I have quiet resentment. That's getting to the core of it. Right? You can't let unfairness make you bitter, right? In those times that you're being overlooked, when you're passed up on promotions, when you're watching less qualified people succeed, oh, it's got to make you bitter to say, I have done A, B, C, X, Y, Z, and look at this person right here. Right? You can't let unfairness make you think position equals wisdom. Titles don't equal maturity. Popularity doesn't equal character. And you can't let unfairness keep you from humility. Life, we all know this, life won't always feel fair, but wisdom still matters, even in the unfairness. These verses here, they're pressing on comparison and frustration. And perhaps for some of you, that might be watching others date, potentially get married, watching others succeed faster, feeling stuck or unnoticed, feeling behind in life. Maybe it's none of those things I just listed. Maybe it's something that's more specifically tailored for you. But this is all like that spark, right? That lighter that just sparked the right way right into dry grass. It's here where foolishness grows quietly. In your bitterness, in your comparison, in your cynicism, in your quiet resentment. Unfair seasons reveal what's really in your heart, so the fire continues growing. It's about trusting in God's sovereignty and being humble is what Solomon eventually gets to. Trusting God's sovereignty and being humble through what feels unfair. Humility is so hard, especially when folly has rooted itself in our hearts and our minds. Careless decisions, overconfidence, and our own effort shape our choices. And in Ecclesiastes 10, 8 through 15, Solomon shows how giving into folly slowly forms patterns that shape a person's life. So the warning there is guard your habits, because they either lead you toward wisdom or toward harm. So we have to be careful with our choices, our decisions. And that's point number 2 for tonight, is watch your choices. At this point, brothers and sisters, the fire's spread. Right? It's no longer that little subtle spark. The fire's spread. If the first spark is your reactions, the fire starts spreading into your choices. Once the fire starts, it doesn't stay in one place. It moves, it spreads, it reaches new ground, and that's what happens when small, foolish choices become patterns. Solomon's saying foolishness leaks into everyday life. Folly looks like this. It's in our careless decisions. It's in our overconfidence. It's in our undisciplined speech. It's in our empty effort. How many of us have ever been so overly confident we knew we were going to get this, we're a shoo-in for this particular role, and we don't end up getting it? The thoughts and hopefully the words that come out of us after that, I hope aren't foolish, but sometimes they are. The preacher here says folly will appear in how you work and how you speak and how you handle life. So a little folly doesn't stay little. It starts showing up in specific ways. And those specific ways are careless choices. We start creating preventable pain. See, careless decisions create unnecessary pain. Foolishness ignores consequences. And it's not bad luck or a bad opportunity. Sometimes in our foolishness and our foolish thinking, our foolish speaking and working and all of that, all of it is preventable damage. It's preventable. But we get so filled with what we want and how unfair this was or how we didn't get that or why we have to wait for this or I deserve this, that we start damaging. We start creating pain and causing pain in our lives. That's all preventable. This could come from just financial woes, financial shortcuts, rushed relationships, poor boundaries, risky decisions made from loneliness. And here's what we shouldn't do. We shouldn't do. Right? We shouldn't sabotage our own life through impatience. It's so impatient sometimes. That impatience leads to sabotaging. We sabotage ourselves in that impatience. We start breaking down walls, doors. I need to get through this door because behind this door is A, B, C, X, Y, Z. I need that. Or we start playing the if-only game. If only I had this. If only I had this job, then I'd be super happy. But then you get that job, and you go, if only I had a spouse and a kid and a house. Right? Then it's this if-only game that it's not a fun game to play. Right? We sabotage our own lives by our impatience. We ignore wisdom because we're tired of waiting. I'm sure a lot of us in here are tired of waiting. We are impatient. A lot of our own hurt comes from foolish choices. So Solomon is saying a lot of this can be preventable pain. You have to trust and look to God's sovereignty in your life. Because just because things are unfair or things aren't going the way that we have intended them to be going, we don't need to be careless in our choices and our decisions. Right? It also looks like this. In verses 10 through 11, right, he's saying if the iron is blunt and what does not sharpen the edge, he must use more strength. But wisdom helps one to succeed. If the serpent bites before it is charmed, there is no advantage to the charmer. This is talking about pride, a prideful effort. See, pride refuses preparation and makes life harder. It makes life harder. He mentions in here also the axe being dull, a dull axe. It's a lack of preparation. A snake bite is a lack of wisdom, right? Why would you reach your hand in there? There's a snake there. Pride makes life harder than it needs to be. And this isn't about simply working harder. I'm not trying to stand up here and preach to you. Work harder. Work harder. What we see here is a lack of skill, lack of growth, overconfidence, and a refusal to learn. Right? These things compound on each other. If we're thinking this way already, right, we're going to naturally do what? We're going to start speaking this way. We're going to start acting this way. We're going to start making decisions this way. And so they start compounding on each other, and then we're throwing in the towel, we're storming off, we're leaving, we're giving up. Pride creates an emptiness, and we try to fill it with comfort, success, relationship, and attention. Right? And it shows up in real ways. It could be stalled careers. It could be emotional immaturity. Could be repeated mistakes. Could be ignored areas of growth. It could be all these things. Sometimes the fire spreads because we refuse to slow down and deal with what needs attention. You can't just let your pride fuel your effort. That would be foolish. Instead, spend the needed time humbly working on what? On your spiritual character, your spiritual habits, your spiritual maturity. That's hard. That's hard in the waiting. I'm impatient. I want this now. And it's hard to think, I need to work on my spiritual character. But I think if we're running a spiritual diagnosis, right, then we're going to say, I need to work on these spiritual things so that I can cling to the Lord. I can stay rooted in God's word. I can reflect Christ when things are unfair, when I'm not getting what I think I deserve. Now, brothers and sisters, what we deserve is we deserve an eternity away from God. We deserve to be eternally separated from God's presence. That's what we deserve. But what we get is God's grace and his love and his mercy. That's what we get. Romans 12:3 says this, "For by the grace given to me, I say to everyone among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think with sober judgment." We need to be thinking with sober judgment as we go through these things in life. We can't be overly confident or thinking too highly of ourselves in moments like this, because that only leads to disappointment. We need to deal with the reality of things, our capabilities, our capacities, who we are as an individual, right? And the very purpose of our lives, and that's to be made more in the image of Christ. Those are the things, that's the reality that we're dealing with. Right? Pride resists needed growth. Bitterness resists needed growth. In verses 12 through 15, right, Solomon's talking about the condition of the heart. Right? He says, the words of wise men win him favor, but the lips of a fool consume him. The beginning of the words of his mouth is foolishness, and the end of his talk is evil madness. A fool multiplies words, though no man knows what is to be, and who can tell him what will be after. The toil of a fool wearies him, for he does not know the way to the city. Verse 15 should convict us. The toil of a fool. How often do we toil and labor and it ends being nothing? Because we're acting foolishly in that toil and labor. This reveals the heart. Reckless words reveal the heart. Undisciplined words damage your life and damage the life of other people. Right? Foolish speech can be destructive, excessive, arrogant, exhausting. And how do these words sound? Well, it's cynicism. Cynicism about whatever in life, about your work, about people sitting around you, about dating, it's a bitterness in general about life. It's a complaining, it's over-talking. Your mouth reveals what your heart is carrying. And we should care about that. We should care about what our speech and how we speak to one another and how we talk and how we're thinking in public and in private, because that reveals the heart. Luke 6:45, the good person out of the good treasure of his heart produces good, and the evil person out of his evil treasure produces evil, for out of the abundance of the heart his mouth speaks. And your words often reveal what you're actually going through, whether that's pain, frustration, disappointment, or pride. Your words aren't small. They produce outcomes. You speak carelessly and you'll experience the damage. You speak wisely and you'll experience the good that comes from that. Right? Proverbs 18:21 shows us that contrast in a very small verse. Death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat its fruits. A small neglect leads to spreading damage. Folly affects reactions, choices, and your direction. And that leads us to our last section here, verses 16 through 20. See, this last section shows us everyday patterns and habits shape outcomes over time. Solomon is showing that repeated behaviors don't stay small. Don't stay small. They form a lifestyle that either stabilizes or slowly tears you down. So watch carefully in what direction you're headed. Right? Know what it is. Know what it is to take a foolish route or a wise route. That's the last point for tonight, is watch your direction. You watch your reactions, you watch your choices, and you watch your direction. By this point, the wildfire has devastated things. There's destruction. Right? By the time a wildfire catches this point, it's no longer just a spark. Whole areas are affected. People have been evacuated at this point. And this is where Solomon ends this chapter. Not just with moments or patterns, but with the direction of a whole life. The life you build privately becomes the life that you live publicly. And what's being said here textually is this. Verses 16 through 17 is it's about leaders who indulge versus leaders who show restraint. In verse 18, right, through sloth the roof sinks in, and through indolence the house leaks. Neglect leads to decay. Verse 19 and 20 are about careless, pleasure-centered living. It's about me. It's about how I want to live, my wants, my desires. See, foolishness shows up in how you live your life when you're living for comfort instead of purpose. I get it. There's some of us in here who, it's like, I deserve some comfort. I deserve some peace. I deserve some quiet. Right? But sometimes what we think we deserve aren't not the things that we're going to get. Living for comfort instead of purpose is what's being mentioned here. Verses 16, 17, and then 19. See, a life shaped around comfort doesn't burn all at once. It slowly dries out the ground. This isn't about food, but about appetite. What are you hungry for? Because appetite rules the fool. Are you hungry for entertainment? Are you hungry for escape? Are you hungry for pleasure? Are you hungry for comfort? What's fueling you? What's driving you if it's not Christ? See, dry ground is forming at this point, and then when a spark comes, it spreads fast. Are you building a life of purpose, or are you just managing discomfort? If comfort becomes the goal, we lose complete sight of wisdom. I'm not saying that if you're living comfortably right now, that you're doing something you're not supposed to be doing. I'm not saying that, right? God gives us those seasons of comfort, of peace, of quiet, right? But there are going to be moments in our life where we experience discomfort and pain and suffering, and that's a part of life because this world is misaligned. This world is fallen, and this is what Solomon is talking about here, right? We know the truth about this world, and we have a solution to it, so how we live actually matters. How you make those choices, how you react to what's happening, and the direction in which you're walking in is all based on you wanting to be more and more like Christ. Because the faith that you're living out is a lifestyle. It's not a whenever I feel like it. Or it's not, I'm doing good right now, so I'm not going to trust in God right now this second because I'm doing really well. I'm doing really well. It's not just about managing discomfort. It's about trusting in God's sovereignty. It's knowing that you're fueled by the Holy Spirit to live his life no matter the outcomes, no matter the circumstances or the situations. Verse 18, right, talks about neglect that leads to decay. Neglect slowly destroys our stability because we are neglecting to do something. We're not going to, if we don't do something after we've done it for so long and we stop doing it, we're leaving it to decay. He's talking about a saggy house, a leaky house. Things are going to fall apart if they aren't maintained. Laziness, avoidance, passive living, or a lack of maintenance and upkeep. And it is not like a sudden collapse, but a slow deterioration. No one ruins their life overnight. It collapses slowly. Often neglected areas, and I probably don't have to say this because you guys are probably already thinking of those neglected areas, your spiritual life. Sometimes it's health, it's your finances, it's your home, it's your relationships. What you neglect today will collapse tomorrow. Proverbs 24, 30 through 34 gives us an illustration of that. Neglect slowly destroying stability. I passed by the field of a sluggard, by the vineyard of a man lacking sense, and behold, it was all overgrown with thorns. The ground was covered with nettles, and its stone wall was broken down. Then I saw and considered it. I looked and received instruction. A little sleep, a little slumber, and a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come upon you like a robber, and want like an armed man. If we neglect, we're not ready. If we neglect, we're stagnant, we're complacent. Neglect slowly destroys stability. In this last verse of this chapter, he's talking about indiscretion. Private speech reveals private decay. You may be masking how you speak publicly, but what does that look like at home? When you're in your room, by yourself, what are you thinking about? What are you saying? Perhaps it's not that private. Perhaps that private is with you and two confidants. It's two people that you're going to go grab coffee with. What are you guys talking about? What are you saying? Right? Our words in private reveal our true hearts. Bitterness, frustration, discontentment, and the effects of a tough season always leaks out into your words. What you really think of, let's say, your boss or your coworkers. What you really think of whoever's sitting right next to you. How much you disagree with, let's just say, a pastor or a small group leader. How life didn't turn out the way that you expected it would. Right? We can keep going on and on, right? And perhaps sometimes just wallow in that, just swim in it and wade through it. This is my life, right? My boss doesn't like me. I don't like him. My coworkers, that pastor keeps saying this. That small group leader keeps bugging me, keeps texting me. You may not be saying those things out loud, but the words that you speak in private reveal what's growing in your heart. And Christ talks about that in Matthew chapter 12, verses 35 through 37. He says, the good person out of his good treasure brings forth good, and the evil person out of his evil treasure brings forth evil. I tell you, on the day of judgment, people will give account for every careless word they speak, for by your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned. How you think and how you speak in private matters because it reveals your heart. That one tiny spark. When I was a kid, I remember playing with matches. And I wasn't making fire in the general normal sense as a little kid, if that makes sense. I was lighting those matches and quickly blowing them out and throwing them behind my couch. I don't know why, but I was doing that. Lighting them, I think I did like almost the whole pack. I did it quietly, thinking nobody would notice. It didn't seem like a big deal in the moment. Thankfully, my parents walked in. They could smell the matches, that somebody had lit matches, but before anything worse could happen. We were supposed to go to some local fair, and I didn't end up getting to go because of that. So I think it was justice served. That's how foolishness works. It doesn't start big. It starts small. It's subtle. It's gradual. And it's mostly unnoticed. One spark, one reaction, one careless decision, one area we begin to neglect. And over time, that's all it takes. It doesn't take much foolishness to reshape our lives. Let's pray. God, thank you so much for this time. Thank you for your word. Lord, thank you for the Spirit, your Spirit, for his guidance and his direction in our everyday life. Lord, I pray that in whatever we're doing, God, we're able to see and notice any folly in our lives, Lord, and repent of it and begin to live wisely. God, I pray that whatever might be rooted in any one of our hearts, God, that we give that up tonight. Lord, that we lay it down at your feet, Lord, and that we're able to cast that into you, any anxieties that we might have.